Hey MiniWarGamers, welcome to another episode of The Machine Shop with Ash. This is my weekly show about wargaming and wargamers. We discuss things on this show, usually something you've stirred up in my head or you guys have requested or we talk about it in the comments. I pick a topic, I expand on it, evangelize on it, editorialize on it, whatever comes into my head, and basically start another round of discussion. So this week's topic, seeing past the models. This was sparked actually off of last week's episode 19, which is army hopping. I kind of had a throwaway discussion about the elevated position when you play an army a whole bunch and you start to see past the miniatures themselves. And that sparked a bunch of discussion in the comments on YouTube and on my Facebook page about what does that mean. And people requested that I did a show, actually a follow-up show to episode 19. So go back and watch episode 19 if you want to see army hopping and the effects, the detrimental effects that can have you getting better to playing a game and getting better with an army. And this week's episode is going to be about seeing past the models. So basically that bit in the Matrix where, what's his name, Cypher is talking about how he doesn't even see the code anymore. You know, it's just dropping and he just sees, you know, blondes, brunettes, redheads, all that stuff. So basically seeing past the ones and zeros in the code. Abstraction is at the heart of pure gameplay. People, I talked about this in Playing to Win, people who play games at a very high level strip away all of the unessential aspects of the game. People who play Go or chess or whatever at a high level, they don't see the things as knights, rooks, kings, queens. They see them based on their capabilities and what they can do. So this is an interesting thing we can talk about as it comes to wargaming. And something that might be really unnatural to people. Wargaming is an immersive and cinematic experience. The point of wargaming from a hobby side is that you're creating a narrative. It says this in the 40K rulebook all the time. You're forging a narrative, a story that's playing out in front of you. So for a lot of people, I would say most people, it's counterintuitive to try and remove that from the game. And I think that some people who do play to win and play games at a very high level or competitive level, they get a bad rap because they do that naturally. They pull out the story-driven cinematic aspect of the game while they play because to them it's nonsense, it's superfluous. And what they do is they are looking past the models themselves. So let's talk about that. Let's get to talking about what does it mean to see past the models and actually play a game. All right, so how am I gonna do this? This is gonna be an interesting thing because you guys are listening to me right now on YouTube. And a lot of you need to have your perceptions shifted in order to even, I think, follow along with this kind of conversation. So from an abstract gaming point of view, you're sitting there and you're assembling 30 orcs. Right, you're assembling 30 orcs, Slugger Boys, 40K, and you're assembling them from the point of view of, these are my cool orc models. I'm putting them together. They have sluggers, they have choppas, they have two big shooters. And what you're doing is you're modeling them to be orcs. Now, a person who's seeing past orcs into pure gameplay, they don't see orcs. They see a 30 wound model that can effectively dish out 56 strength 4 hits in melee on average, right, using math, and 2.5 strength 9 AP2 hits with a power claw in melee. At 12 inches, it can dish out on average 10 strength 4 hits with sluggers. At, let's say, 36 inches with its big shooters, it can dish out on average 3 strength 5 hits. This is where you start seeing things in abstract. They aren't orc boys. They are a 30 wound model that can see 360, that has a footprint the size of 1-inch bases, basically spread out 2 inches away, that operates in a 360 environment. You need, if you're going to look at something from an abstract, you have to pull out the name, the fact that they're big green monsters, and you have to look at them as tokens. They are a resource. Now, this isn't easy. This might be the hardest thing for you to possibly do. But guys, when they tinker with army lists, and that could be a whole other show in of itself, is tinkering and building army lists, is they start looking at their models as resources. They are an asset. So that kind of boils down now to other things you can think of, and you can even anecdotalize on why do certain games get played a certain way. I've heard a lot of people talk about how War Machine games get played with very little terrain. Well, there's a reason for that. One, terrain, pretty as it might be, interferes with the mathematics of a game. If you want to play a very precise gaming-only game, if you want to play War Machine at its most purest level, go play it on Vassal. Vassal is basically a computer simulation of playing a game of War Machine. And it's great because it takes out all the interference of bumping models, moving models, having to actually precisely measure things. And even more so, the impact that terrain can have on stuff, because terrain is big and it's in the way. It just flattens everything to 2D. I had an idea a long time ago that if I was wanting to make some money from tournament organizers that ran War Machine games, I would go and I would print out a TOs pack that was basically just 2D templates of hills, trees and forests. I'm giving this away now, so Muse on Minis, I don't know, whoever else out there, Fat Mac guys, you go do this now. You go make some money off my idea, because I think it's a great idea. And they are just 2D representations of all that stuff. And you never play with scenery again. You put it down on one of those cool Fat Mats from Frontline Gaming, and you have an absolute, like, flat 2D hill. It's just another piece of vinyl, like mouse pad or whatever. It has the impact of being an inch tall hill. If your model's sitting on it, it gets to follow the rules for being an inch tall hill. Same with the woods. It's just a tree template, right? It's a round tree template for a woods. If you're touching it, then you're in a woods. Walls, all of this stuff. You can literally play War Machine, and I think a lot of War Machine players who play at a very competitive level would prefer to play War Machine like it was a board game. Everything is a flat 2D template that has the effect that it has in the game. That's playing Vassal on a computer. So if you want to play pure War Machine, absolutely pure War Machine, where there's absolutely no margin for messing it up, there's no human error for moving and bumping models, you play Vassal. There's no models, you're playing on a flat 2D screen, and everything just is its stats. It does what it does. You can't possibly get extra movement. You can't bump models. You can't do anything past the basic simulation of the game. And high-level War Machine players, I think, enjoy playing Vassal against each other, probably because they can see past the miniatures. There is no display going on around them. There's no horn sounding in the background, and there's no epic giant robots charging towards each other. There's just the pure mathematics of a game being played against something else. And when we talk about abstraction, that's what we're talking about. Boiling away the name, the attributes, the story, all of that stuff that's associated with the game, and looking at it from a purely asset resource-based mentality. Now, that's just looking at units though. That's just looking at the resources at your disposal. There's actually a step further that you go past that, which we started to talk about in Machine Shop episode 19, which is seeing the game itself from that point of view, of seeing a turn sequence or a sequence of turns, not as where they are now, but where you want to be in 5 turns. So, I can anecdotalize on that, but let's talk about what that could mean. So for instance, there is a very tried and true strategy right now in Warhammer Fantasy Battle of bunkering victory points. If you ever talk to Clarence about his Dark Elf army, he has a fast cavalry army, and if you've watched him play me with it, he plays very conservatively with a lot of those units, committing them usually on turn 5 or 6, and only if he knows he can absolutely get away with the math to win the combats that he's in and achieve the victory that he wants to get to clean up those points. What he's doing is, in his head, he's keeping a running tally of victory points. If you look at a unit that can move around the board really fast in Warhammer, that's worth a lot of victory points, as what it can do offensively, you're only seeing half of its value. The other half of its value in a game of Warhammer is that it can protect those many victory points. So again, we're talking about abstraction right now. A lot of people play a miniature game and they only play for what can I do with this to remove victory points from my opponent's pool and put them in mine. The abstract way of looking at your own units is, what can I do with these units to keep them from getting pulled out of my pool into his pool of victory points? And that's, again, boiling away the story of these heroic guys on their steeds should go and ride over there and kill a bunch of stuff and earn me victory points. And actually start to look at the abstract of, wait a minute, these are actually being protected by virtue of their speed and how fast they can move around. A lot of Eldar players will take little units of 3 jet bikes, and on paper they don't look great. It's 3 jet bikes. What do? Well, they go and they contest objectives on turn 5 and turn 6 because they're, objective secured if you're playing Battleforged. That's amazing. On paper, they don't look offensively fantastic, but from a meta of the game point of view, of going and securing objectives, earning you victory points at the end of the game, you can spend 60 victory points to earn you, 60 points to earn you a victory by the end of the game. And so when we talk about abstraction, this is what we're talking about. Not just what a thing is and how it can go about the easy thing of accumulating steps towards victory, but what does it do to prevent your opponent? What kind of resources does it present to keep your opponent from accumulating victory as well? And so I think the best thing for me to do now is kind of anecdotalize. This is a concept I'm talking about right here, is looking past the story, the miniature and stuff like that when you're using your army into what does this do for me to achieve victory? And that might be something that you don't see as being logical. Now there's a few games I'm going to bring up. War Machine's a great example, Warhammer's a great example, Infinity's a great example. Obviously there's 3 games that I play a lot. You can apply these principles to most miniature games. And the reason you can apply them to most miniature games is a lot of miniature games carry fairly similar paths to victory. You know, kill more of your opponent's stuff than he's killing of yours. Be in a certain place at a certain time. These are all things that you can do to win in a lot of different miniature games. They bleed over into different miniature games. And so from the point of view of anecdotalizing, you can probably apply this logic to the game that you like and the game that you play. So if you don't play those 3 games, I've done a little bit of talking about 40K, but I'm going to talk about these other 3 systems when I give some stories and some examples. And hopefully that'll be useful to illustrate my point. So there it is. The explanation of what do I mean when I say playing a game in the abstract. What I really mean is pulling off all of the stuff that isn't about what the unit can do in relation to your path to victory. Stop seeing it as this, you know, hardy band of heroes and start seeing it as an asset, a resource, a thing that you can spend in your path towards victory. And don't just look at the units, but also look at things like the turn. Where am I right now? Where do I need to be by turn 6? And I think that's the second abstraction thing that you need to be able to keep track of is time. And how do you spend your resources in the allotted time to achieve victory? So great anecdotes on that would be things like in Steamroller missions. When you play to a certain number of X or Y points, then you can win the game. So I'm going to tell you some stories. I'm going to anecdotalize on what those things mean. So playing to your turn limit and playing through time and looking at your units as resources inside that matrix to how do you win. All right, so my first example, it's a fairly recent example. Just recently, actually last night, I was teaching Mike from Epic Duck Studios. He's a studio painter, he's done a lot of stuff working here at MiniWarGaming and working for MiniWarGaming and I think painting stuff for the studio here for Matt and Dave. I was teaching him to play Infinity last night. And one of the first things I started telling him about was the way that the order system works in Infinity. So in Infinity, you have your set number of orders. Basically, every guy in your army gives you an activation. Now that's not entirely true. Some guys are a little harder to control than others and only they can use their activation. But if you look at orders as a resource, they are, I can take a guy and he can do a thing X number of games, or X number of turns. Every game of Infinity lasts 3 turns. So for instance, you have 10 guys in your army, each of you giving you 1 activation that you can spend. You've got 30 activations throughout the entire game. Now, in an abstract point of view, that's a resource. Now, the further thing that complicates Infinity is that you don't just get to do things during your turn, you get to do things during your opponent's turn too. And so the hardest part of the learning curve for that game is, when do you stop doing your active turn? When do you stop trying to move forward and take things from your opponent? And when do you start spending that resource, those orders and activations, in setting up your opponent for his active turn? So when do you start putting your army in position so that he can't do, or that your army's ready to do things in ARO, in automatic response, when his army comes into range? And that right there is the game. So a lot of playing Infinity comes down to resource management. It's about managing your activations and not just pushing forward with your plan to accumulate the thing you need to win, but also setting up your army to react to and hold the line against your opponent trying to do the same thing back at you. So it is a conservation and resource management thing, which makes it a very compelling game. But it also makes it really hard for people who haven't played it before to kind of immerse their brain into. They're used to only being able to do things during their turn. So a lot of guys make the mistake of spending their orders all trying to Rambo forward and do stuff. And their models end up getting left out in the open, left out hung to dry, because they run out of orders, or they blow through a bunch of orders because they failed a bunch of rolls, trying to get to a thing that they wanted to accomplish during the turn. And they find themselves out on a limb. So my first bit of advice, as I was kind of coaching him through his first game, was, once you've gone through half your orders, stop and start looking at the board and thinking, where are all my guys right now and where do I want them to be when you start taking actions and you start taking orders? And that's an abstract point of view. It's really easy to get lost in the cinematic appeal of a game like Infinity. Really pretty models, very cool table. Guys can do heroic things like jump from rooftop to rooftop. Giant robots can machine guys down. But to play that game at a high level, you have to pull all that back and start thinking about, what can this thing do for me? The second part of this story is actually about one of the models he brought. Mike brought a fairly unconventional army. And one of the things that he brought in a very small point game, about 200 points, was he brought a tag. He brought his lizard for his nomads. But he brought it in combination with an army that didn't give that tag a whole bunch of orders. So my advice to him at the beginning was, you don't have a lot of orders. You don't have a lot of regular orders that you can spend on this one model. In fact, he only had 3 in the entire army, 3 regular orders, and the rest of them were irregular and impetuous. So he didn't have the ability to feed that guy a bunch of resources and have him go around Ramboing stuff. So my advice was, don't look at this guy as an offensive piece. Look at him as a very defensive piece, and a piece that can earn you victory through the scenario that we're playing, which was called Supremacy. It was the most expensive piece on the table. It was probably twice as many points as my most expensive guy. And what that meant was he could position that model on any quadrant on the board and take it from my army. So that quadrant would belong to him. So it's hard for people to, in the abstract, wrap their brain around, this is my most expensive piece. If it's not killing guys every turn, I've wasted all these points on it. But in fact, in that game, the best thing he could do with that model was have it sit on suppression fire, so basically spend it unorder to make it so that as long as it can see a bunch of stuff, is my stuff coming into range, it's getting all kinds of activations for free from me. It's feeding off of my orders all of a sudden. And keeping it in reserve until the final turn. So planning out that in 3 turns, he wanted that piece to be able to just toe into a zone and be like, mine, this is my quadrant, I'm earning victory this way, this is the way that I'm getting this stuff. And so pushing his brain into the abstract, he stopped looking at his giant robot as, ooh, cool, giant robot, go kill. But giant robot got to do things that it doesn't necessarily intuitively look like it can do on paper. It's giant robot machine gun. What you think it should be doing is running forward and killing stuff. But in the abstract, what a good player can do with a piece like that is use it on the defensive. Use it to set up ambushes, traps, control the board. And in a game like Infinity, where you're mostly playing for the mission and killing your guys can be secondary in 90% of missions, that piece becomes a resource that you're spending in other ways. And especially when you have the challenge of the resource of your orders and how do you spend them to get the most effectiveness out of your unit, that level of abstraction, that level of like meta thinking about how he's playing the army was super important to him playing that game. So there's my first example, and that's for Infinity. My second example, Warhammer Fantasy Battle. One of the things that you'll see high-level Warhammer Fantasy Battle players do before they even start their turn, so let's say they've gone first or second, is they're going to walk over to their opponent's side of the table, they're going to grab their tape measure, and they're going to start putting dice in front of every single one of their opponent's units. What they're doing there is they are measuring out the average charge ranges of all of those guys. So if you take an average roll, so let's say 7 on 2 dice, right, it's the average roll, add the movement value of a Warhammer unit, so let's say my dwarves, it's 3. That means that you have a 10-inch bubble at which on average I can charge you. Once you get to 11 inches or even 10.1 inches, I have to roll hard 8, hard 9, hard 10 as soon as you get a little bit further out. So what you're doing there by creating that bubble of threat basically in my army, in front of my army, is you're deciding this is my safe zones. This is where I can move units and not move units. As opposed to just going, well, I'm going to get up as close as I can because that's going to help me to charge. This is a meta way of thinking. It's stopping looking at your units as heroic hardy bands of dwarves or thunderers and starting to look at them as, this is the threat range of my unit, this is the threat range of your unit. This is what the math says should happen, so how do I conservatively play and put myself in a place where I want to be? Likewise, people using little arc, like 90-degree arc pieces on their units and laser pointers, they will position their units in such a way where they know exactly where that unit is and how it's going to be able to be charged, not be charged, whatever, in the following turn. This is a huge deal. And high-level Warhammer players, you're going to see do this all the time. Likewise, as I discussed earlier, they're going to do things like decide which turn they're going to commit. Plan their turns out far in advance. For instance, my dwarf army, it likes to fight on turn 4. I like to see my dwarves in combat on turn 4. Why? Because I'm spending points on things that lose effectiveness as soon as I'm in combat. My organ guns, my cannons, even my gyrocopters, they're not good anymore as soon as my dwarves are fighting. And here's the thing my dwarves do really well, they stay in a fight. So if I get into combat on turn 2, all I've done is remove those things as a target from 2/3 of the points in my army. What I want is I want my units to not have to be able to be charged. So I do things like put gyrocopters in front of them, slow them down, redirect them, move them out of the way. And then my big anvil of dwarves will come in around turn 4. If I'm charging on turn 4, if even I'm being charged bottom of turn 4, I've usually had 4 turns to soften guys up with shooting, bombing runs, the flames or the steam guns coming into my gyrocopters. And now I'm playing like a bully, which is how you gotta play Warhammer. The odds need to be in your favor when you finally do get into a battle. That's the only way the dwarves win. They're great at sticking in a fight, but the big double-sided like blade that is great at being stubborn and fighting forever is, you're removing the effectiveness of your other units. So even though I might want to heroically walk up and start hammering guys with like my dwarves, it doesn't actually fit strategy of winning the game. The strategy of winning the game is play to the weakness of your opponent. If your opponent can't shoot back, shoot him for as long as possible. If your opponent can't take a punch him as many times as you can. And if your opponent only is good on the charge, never let him charge. You always want to be playing to the weakness of your opponent, the strength of your opponent, and get as many turns of maximum effectiveness in as you possibly can. If my dwarves are either charging at the bottom of turn 4 or even being charged at the bottom of turn 4, because there's an advantage in that for me as well, then I'm happy. And things like ranging out threats, looking at arcs, and planning out which turn, what are the units that are across from me, and what turn do I want to be in combat with them, and what am I going to do to make it so that that's the turn I'm in combat with them, it goes a huge way to start actually winning games. Bunkering victory points as well. Deciding on turn 5 or 6 that you're just not going to charge, that you're going to move out of charge range or out of arc can be a huge deal. It doesn't seem heroic, it doesn't seem like what you should do, but if I have 3 Ironbreakers left on my Dwarf Lord, it might not look like a lot of models, but it's almost like 1,000 points on the table. Same with my Gutstar. If my Lord and my Slaughtermaster and my BSB are still alive and there's 1 Iron Gut left, I am at like 1,100 points left on the table. They will run away from everything. I don't care what it is that I could mop up. If it's a 100-point unit, the possibility that I might get hurt keeps me running away from the other side. And in fact, that right there is, I think, a reason enough to sort of move on. Is I think I've talked enough about how you bunker victory points and how you plan out your game term in Warhammer. So let's move on to another anecdote. I think here's an interesting one. Doing the math on damage for assassination runs in War Machine. One of the things that I think is the biggest challenge to War Machine players is when they play on a clock. A lot of War Machine tournaments, you have to play on a clock, you have death clock, you have time turns. So let's say, for instance, you're playing a game, you and your opponent both have 60 minutes with which to complete the game. So you have 2 hours total, 60 minutes split between the two of you. Somebody clocks out, they're dead, game's over, so you're playing on a clock. Being able to do math very fast, to strip away the fact that you have a big heroic warcaster and look at the odds. This is the defense of my target, this is the mat of my guy. How much damage can I do with average rolls? What are my average rolls and how can I get to you and kill you? Not looking for spike dice, not looking for clutch dice. That's the mark of a good War Machine player. Better still, looking at how can I achieve it so that I barely even need to roll dice. I don't need the average rolls. I need less than average rolls to try and kill you through an assassination run or to try and kill this big multi-box thing that I'm trying to kill. Again, it's a level of abstraction. You don't count on it, you do the math. And being able to do that math on a clock, fast, or even better yet, during your opponent's turn. A lot of really great War Machine players will say, when it's your turn, you go. When it's your opponent's turn, you plan. You go in the tank while your opponent's doing things, and by the time he's hitting the clock to go into the next stage, you should already know what you're doing, and you just start moving pieces. And you don't get derailed no matter what happens to the dice on that plan. You don't go on, as I've heard it called now, tilt while you're playing the game, because that's the thing that's going to rob you of victory. You plan when you have time to plan, which is why your opponent's spending his resource, which is time in this case, the abstract resource of time. And once it's your turn and you're spending your resource again, you just enact your plan and you go. So, can everybody do this? I don't think so. This is a topic that I think really only applies to people that are chasing victory. And you looked, if you've watched my show for its entire run for all 20 episodes, you've probably seen Playing to Win as one of my episodes. These are the people whose fascination is with solving the puzzle that is the best way to achieve victory. And the high-level people that are doing this, they are looking at the game in an abstract. They aren't being driven by the story, the models, or how compelling an interesting a race or a species or a faction or an army or a history they have in their army list. They aren't being compelled by the seduction of the easy road to accumulating victory points, which is usually walking over and actively killing your opponent. They're trying to achieve victory by hook or by crook, by planning out their turns, planning out when and how they're going to fight, and what their resources are to do so. And that's a really interesting way to play the game. As I talked about in army hopping, I think it's something you get good at the more you play. A lot of comments were about, in the last episode, how it's actually useful to play other people's armies too, because you get experience with them and you learn what they do. I agree with that to an extent. Experience is the best way to do anything. I think the more experience you have with what you're gonna be using yourself all the time though, the better. And I still stand by the fact that the more you switch gears between armies, the more you're interrupting that experience earning with the individual armies. So the more you stick to one army and you play with it and you gain experience, and you play against other armies, and you look at what they do on paper, but then you see what they do in practice, and you see more importantly what the opponent you're playing against does with them, because the opponent is a factor here, not just the army list and the things it can do on the table, but the more experience you can gain, the better you're gonna get. And I think that's where you reach this point where you start to play in the abstract. You see things not for what they are, for what they are on paper, for what they say they are, for what their image is or their story or their background, and you start to see them in the abstract, which is as a resource that you are going to spend on the road to victory. So I hope you enjoyed this follow-up show. It's kind of a follow-up show. I mean, it's a standalone topic too, which is seeing past the models and seeing things in the ones and zeros of the matrix, planning out your turns, planning out all the resources at your disposal. Time, the road to victory, the number of turns you're playing within, and all the other things that add up to the things I have at my disposal, the things in my arsenal that I get to spend when I play a game to achieve victory. Like always, let's chat about it in the comments. So you can hit me up here on YouTube. Is usually the easiest. Reply to one of my comments if you want to get me to notice it and chat. Or best of all, go to Facebook, facebook.com/outofthebasement-into-the-streets, my Facebook page, and follow up with me there. Talk to me about the show, or if you have an idea for a show topic, talk about me there as well. So I hope you enjoyed this show. It's a bit of fan service. You guys talked about this a whole bunch. Got my brain ruminating on it. Yeah, let's move on. So here we go with On the Painting Table. Let's take a look at what I've been working on this week in my own personal hobby. All right, so a few bits and pieces this week. First of all, I've got some infinity scenery. I got some of these Antenna City Workshop cars, little smart cars I thought were pretty cool. Some of the signage, these are like billboardy things that go on the street. And I got some more work done on my Squallow, just more base coating and washing really. But he's looking pretty cool. At this point, just, you know, got some basic colors down on him. He's lots more work, but he's got his arms attached now, which is pretty cool. Then I did finish my UA for my Iron Fang Pikeman. This is the basic UA, not the Black Dragon one. Everyone's gonna be like, why didn't you pick the Black Dragon one? Well, I like these guys more. I think Pathfinder in the Charge is cool. And I do understand, yes, I just did a show about the math. Being able to get +4 armor when you run on first turn and get in the zone and jam things up is great, but these guys have also cool things about them, and I will make them work, I promise. I also assembled and threw a base coat down on Ungrim Iron Fist. He's the incarnate of fire in the Warhammer End Times, and I've had this model for almost 20 years, I think, and never painted him, so I figured it was time to actually get him down. I stuck him on a big high base just so he'd rank up in a unit. It's going to be almost impossible to get him to rank up if I didn't make him really tall. That's why he looks the way he looks. So there's my my model collection from this week. Now also, I got some stuff here I printed off. You're going to ask me what these are. These are decals. Decals. In Canada, they're decals. I've been living in the US for 4 years, so decals. People will laugh about how I say these two words. I'm just going to say both of them. That were posted on the WGC, the Wargamers Consortium Infinity Forum, or Infinity Group on Facebook, and I print some off. So these are the, whatchamacallits, the Pan-Oceania, the Ariadna, and the Yuching ones, all unofficial, but super handy. So now my tag's gonna have some markings on them. So expect this guy to get some cool decals. That's right, decals, I'm Canadian. And or decals if I was still living in the States when I am done. So just print it on regular decal paper, and then I'll have to paint white underneath all the ones that have white on them. I don't know if you know that, but there's no such thing as white decal paper. Well, there is, but it's annoying to use, so I'll paint white underneath and then put the decal on top. So there's those guys. They were sprayed with some Tesser's Dull Coat just to seal them, and we'll see how they turn out when they turn out. So there it is, this week's On the Painting Table. All right there, guys, so thanks for watching. I hope you guys really enjoyed this episode. It was, again, requested by you, so it's me meandering on and babbling about seeing past the models and playing the game at a high level, or games in general at a high level. So if you want to talk to me about anything to do with this topic, or if you have an idea for a future topic, once again, hit me up on Facebook, facebook.com/outofthebasement-into-the-streets. You can comment on any of my comments on this video on YouTube, or you can comment on the MiniWarGaming Facebook or MiniWarGaming page in the comments there. I try and keep up with those, but again, the best way to get my attention is have it buzz on my phone, and that means replying to a comment that I made, or posting on my Facebook page, because again, those just go right to my phone and I see them immediately. So you're more likely to get them seen if you do it those two ways. So we'll be back next week with another episode of the Machine Shop, episode 21. We'll see you for that one. Thanks again for watching. Until then, happy wargaming.